Under the scorching Nevada sun, 4 women stand beside a broken Harley, clutching an urn of their friend's ashes, stranded, heartbroken, and out of hope. Just when the desert seems ready to swallow them whole, a lone rider appears on the horizon. It's Keanu Reeves. What happens next will make millions believe in love's final ride. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in every direction, an ocean of gold and heat. The road shimmered like liquid glass beneath the merciless sun. 4 women rode in a line, engines rumbling beneath them, the air thick with dust and the smell of gasoline. Cassie led the pack, her eyes hidden behind mirrored aviators, a small metal urn strapped securely to her back. It contained the ashes of their best friend, Riley. Behind her rode Juno, Maya, and Tara, 3 women bound not by blood, but by the road. Their friend Riley had been the heart of their biker circle, the one who always knew where to stop for pie, which detour had the best view, who carried the music and the laughter. Now all that remained of her rode inside a tin can, carried across the desert by those she'd once called sisters. The heat pressed on them like a physical weight. Their leather jackets were tied to their handlebars, sleeves rolled up, skin glistening under the harsh light. Cassie could feel sweat trickle down her spine beneath the straps of the urn. Every few miles she glanced in her side mirror, counting helmets 1, 2, 3, making sure no one fell behind. When Riley was dying, she had made Cassie promise one thing. "Take me home," she'd whispered in that hospital bed, voice soft but steady. "Back to Sunset Valley. Scatter me there at sunset. That's where I first learned to ride." Cassie had promised through tears. She had always kept her word. Now, halfway across Nevada, the desert seemed to test that promise. A sudden sputter broke through the harmony of engines. Maya's bike, the youngest and rustiest of the 4, coughed once, twice, and then went silent. She rolled it to the shoulder, gravel crunching under her boots as she came to a stop. Cassie slowed immediately, raising her arm for the others to pull over. They parked in a line under the burning sky. No trees, no buildings, no sound, except the faint buzz of insects. The heat distorted the horizon into rippling waves. "Not again," Maya muttered, pulling off her helmet. Her face was flushed, sweat streaking through dust on her cheeks. She kicked the tire in frustration. "I swear this thing hates me." Juno leaned over, fanning herself with her gloves. "It's not hate, it's exhaustion, like the rest of us." Tara opened a small canteen and handed it to Maya. "Drink slow, we're running low." Cassie crouched beside the bike, checking the tank, the cables, the line. "When's the last time you fueled up?" "Same stop as you," Maya answered weakly. 2 hours ago. Cassie tried the ignition. Nothing. She felt the temperature burning through her jeans as she knelt beside the machine. She could smell the metal baking in the sun. She unscrewed the gas cap and leaned in, bone dry. She cursed under her breath. "You must have had a leak," Maya groaned. "Of course. Why not? Riley's watching, laughing her butt off right now." Cassie forced a smile, though her throat felt dry as dust. "If she is, she's probably saying we should have checked twice." The others laughed softly, the kind that hides fatigue. But beneath the laughter was worry. The road stretched empty both ways. Not a car in sight. Cassie stood, shading her eyes. "We'll flag someone down. Somebody's bound to pass." Tara looked around at the endless horizon. "Out here? Maybe tomorrow." Cassie's heart pounded against the heat. She glanced at the urn. They were halfway through Riley's journey. Giving up wasn't an option. She turned toward the group. "We'll figure this out. She's going home, one way or another." The wind howled faintly through the desert, carrying a ghostly echo of engines long gone. The hours began to stretch. The desert sun climbed higher, turning the pavement into a mirror of white fire. The women gathered what little shade they could behind their bikes, the metal frames radiating heat like ovens. Cassie checked her phone for the 10th time, still no signal. The screen reflected her tired face, eyes red from wind and grief. Juno rummaged through her saddlebag, pulling out a small bottle of water. Only half remained. She twisted the cap and handed it toward Maya, who pushed it back weakly. "You drink it. You're the one who keeps talking," Maya said with a dry laugh. Cassie frowned. "No heroes here. Split it." They each took a sip, barely enough to wet their lips. Tara wiped her forehead, squinting at the endless horizon. "We could walk to the next town," she said. Cassie shook her head. "The next town's 30 miles east. In this heat, we wouldn't make 10. Maya sighed, dropping down onto the gravel, her arms resting on her knees. "So, we're stuck, out here, baking like jerky." The sound of wind filled the silence again. The air smelled faintly of oil and sunburnt rubber. Every now and then, a faint gust would rise, only to die as quickly as it came. Cassie glanced back at the urn strapped to her bike. The metal was warm to the touch, almost too hot. She whispered to it without thinking, "We're still going, Riley. Don't worry." Her voice cracked slightly, and she turned away so the others wouldn't see. She remembered Riley's smile, the fearless grin that could cut through any bad day. Riley had been the kind who never quit, who found joy even in pain. Cassie had promised her she'd finish this ride no matter what, and she would. A sudden rumble in the distance made everyone look up. A truck, long and red, appeared on the horizon. It shimmered like a mirage at first, then became real, kicking up trails of dust as it approached. Cassie ran to the roadside, waving both arms high. The others joined her, shouting, trying to catch the driver's attention. The truck roared closer, horn echoing through the desert. For a moment, hope surged through them like cool air. Then, just as it neared, the truck shifted lanes and thundered past. The driver gave one indifferent glance and kept going. The silence that followed was deafening. Juno muttered something under her breath. Maya kicked a rock into the road, fury breaking through exhaustion. "Are you kidding me? He didn't even slow down." Cassie clenched her fists but said nothing. She just stared after the disappearing trail of dust. Her throat burned with heat and anger. Tara's voice was soft. "We should have brought another tank." Cassie nodded slowly, her voice steady but strained. "We'll find another way. We always do." The sun lowered slightly, turning the light from blinding white to gold. The heat was still fierce, but the color of the sky changed. Softer now. Cassie's heart slowed enough to think clearly again. Riley's words from the hospital echoed in her mind. "Don't quit when it gets hard, Cass. That's when it counts." Cassie breathed deep, her voice quiet but sure. "We're not done. Not yet." She didn't know what made her say it, but somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of another engine began to rise, steady, powerful, and closing fast. The sound grew louder, cutting through the stillness like thunder rolling over sand. Cassie lifted her head, shielding her eyes from the sun. A single figure appeared on the far horizon, a dark silhouette moving fast, glinting chrome and black leather. The others stood, disbelief flickering across their faces. The bike's hum grew, deeper, rhythmic, confident. Whoever it was, rode with purpose, not just passing through. As the rider neared, the shape became clear. A vintage Norton Commando, its paint dulled by dust, but gleaming with care. The man slowed, stopped a few feet away, and removed his helmet. The desert wind caught his hair, streaked with gray and sunlight. His calm gaze moved from the broken bike to the weary faces before him. Cassie froze for a moment. She knew that face. From somewhere, quiet eyes, steady presence, Keanu Reeves. He looked at the stranded women, his tone warm but serious. "Looks like you could use a hand." Cassie exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Yeah, our friend's bike gave out. We're on our way to California to bring someone home." She gestured toward the urn. Keanu's eyes softened. He nodded slowly, scanning the bike. "Then let's make sure she gets there." He crouched beside the Harley, running his fingers along the pipes, the chain, the gas line, calm, methodical, focused. The women exchanged glances, hope flickering back into their tired eyes. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in amber light. The desert felt alive again, as if holding its breath. The promise of the road, the hum of engines, the kindness of a stranger, all merging into one quiet miracle. Something told Cassie this was no ordinary roadside encounter. It was the beginning of something sacred. Keanu crouched beside the broken Harley, his movements calm and unhurried. The desert wind brushed across his shoulders as he wiped the dust from his hands onto his jeans. His tone was soft but confident when he spoke. "Let's see what she's trying to tell us," he said, glancing up at Maya with a reassuring half-smile. Maya nodded nervously. "I don't know what happened. One minute she was fine, the next she just quit." Keanu ran his fingers along the tank and cables, checking for cracks or leaks. His eyes moved with the precision of someone who had done this 100 times. He leaned closer, tapping lightly on the carburetor, listening to the sound. "You've got grit in the line," he murmured. "Common out here. The desert chews up bikes for breakfast." Cassie watched him, her disbelief slowly turning into quiet admiration. He didn't act like a celebrity, didn't carry that air of distance she'd seen in others. There was no entourage, no cameras, just a man on a motorcycle, helping strangers on a forgotten road. Juno, who had been standing back, finally whispered, "You're Keanu Reeves." He looked up briefly, wiping grease from his fingers with a rag he pulled from his pocket. "Last time I checked," he said with a faint grin, "but right now, I'm just the guy with a toolkit." That simple sentence made all 4 women smile for the first time that day. He asked Maya to hand him her key. She hesitated, still starstruck. You actually know how to fix bikes?" Keanu gave her a mock-serious look. "If I didn't, my old Norton would have stranded me about 50 times by now." He twisted the fuel line open, then took out a small tool from his saddlebag. The smell of gas hit the air. A few drops splashed on his hand, but he didn't flinch. He blew through the line to clear it, reattached it, and tightened the bolt with careful pressure. Cassie knelt beside him, curious. "You've done this before?" He nodded. "A lot of my best conversations happened while fixing something on the side of the road." For a moment, no one spoke. The desert was quiet, except for the faint ticking of metal cooling under the sun. A hawk circled high above, its shadow sweeping over the cracked highway. Keanu stood, adjusted the choke, and turned the key. The Harley coughed once, then came alive with a deep, throaty roar. The women gasped, cheering as the sound filled the silence. Maya jumped to her feet, eyes wide with joy. "You did it. Oh my God, you actually did it." Keanu smiled, dusting his hands off. "She just needed a little attention. Machines are like people, they stop running right when they feel neglected." Cassie looked at him with gratitude that went beyond words. "You didn't have to stop for us," he shrugged. "Nobody should ride alone through a breakdown." The sound of the revived engine echoed across the desert, a heartbeat against the silence. Maya grinned like a kid, brushing her hair from her face as she circled her Harley, half in disbelief. "You're a miracle worker," she said, her voice trembling with relief. Keanu shook his head gently. "Nah, just someone who's broken down enough times to recognize the look." His tone was light, but something about his calmness steadied the group. Cassie offered her hand, her palm still rough from long rides and road dust. "Thank you. Seriously. You just saved us hours of walking under that sun." He shook her hand with a humble nod. "Glad I came by when I did." Tara crossed her arms, studying him. "You really ride alone out here? No crew, no cameras following you?" He smiled faintly. "Just me and the road. It's quieter that way." The women exchanged quick glances. There was something grounding about him, something that didn't belong to Hollywood or fame. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. His presence just felt genuine. Keanu crouched again to check the rear wheel, making sure the chain was tight. The desert wind kicked up dust, brushing through their clothes. He squinted toward the horizon. "Where are you headed?" Cassie hesitated, then motioned toward the small urn strapped to her bike. "California. We're taking our friend home. Her name was Riley. She passed last month. Cancer." The mention of the word made the air heavier. Keanu's expression softened. He stood brushing his hands off, eyes meeting hers. And she wanted her ashes there? Cassie nodded. Sunset Valley. It's where she first learned to ride. Said she wanted her final ride to end there too. For a long moment, Keanu didn't say anything. The wind carried the faint sound of rustling sagebrush, a low hum of life against the emptiness. Finally, he spoke, voice quiet but steady. Then, we better make sure she gets there. Maya blinked, unsure what he meant. Wait, you're coming with us? He smiled, lightly. If you don't mind a slowpoke on an old Norton, I'd be honored to ride alongside you for a while. The group fell silent again, caught between surprise and emotion. Juno grinned first. You're serious? He nodded once. 80 miles to the next stop, right? Cassie exhaled a shaky laugh. Yeah, about that. Keanu tilted his head toward the horizon. Then we better get moving before the heat wins. He put on his helmet, swung his leg over the Norton, and kicked it to life with one smooth motion. The engine's growl harmonized with the others, blending into one shared rhythm. Cassie started her bike. The urn behind her seemed to shimmer in the late afternoon sun. She looked back once at Keanu. He nodded, and she nodded back. Then the four women and the quiet stranger rode forward together, engines roaring, dust rising like ghosts behind them as they disappeared into the desert. The group rode in formation, the desert wind roaring in their ears. The golden light of late afternoon stretched their shadows long across the road. Cassie led up front, Keanu beside her, their bikes moving in perfect rhythm. Behind them, Maya, Juno, and Tara followed close. The rumble of 5 engines blending into one steady heartbeat. Cassie glanced at Keanu through her mirror. His posture was relaxed, his focus absolute. He rode like someone who had spent years on the road, not racing it, but listening to it. Each mile seemed to strip away a layer of exhaustion from the group. The barren landscape slowly transformed into rolling dunes of red and orange. The sky above looked endless. A soft haze touching the horizon. Keanu signaled for a stop near an overlook, where the road curved around a small ridge. They pulled over, engines quieting to a low murmur, before cutting off completely. The silence that followed was powerful. Keanu removed his helmet and leaned against his bike, breathing in deeply. You ever notice, he said softly, how the road feels alive out here? Like it remembers everyone who's ever passed? Cassie took off her gloves, nodding. Riley used to say that. She said the desert listens better than people do. Keanu smiled faintly. Then she sounds like someone who understood the silence. For a moment, no one spoke. The air shimmered with heat, but the wind carried a coolness now, a shift that hinted at evening coming. Juno took out her phone and snapped a picture of the horizon. She would have loved this view, she said. Cassie turned toward Keanu. Why did you stop for us? Most people would have just kept riding. He looked out toward the open road. Because I've been stranded before, and because no one deserves to be alone when they're carrying someone they love. The simplicity of his words hit deeper than anything grand could have. Maya blinked fast, trying to hold back tears. Tara reached for her shoulder, giving it a light squeeze. Keanu nodded toward the bikes. We've got daylight left. Let's make it count. They mounted up again, the engines growling to life. This time, the ride felt different. The tension was gone. Cassie could feel the road's rhythm syncing with her heartbeat. Dust kicked up behind them, turning into a shimmering trail under the dying sun. For the first time in days, the women laughed inside their helmets. They pointed at the hawks above, waved to passing cars, and leaned into the wind together. Keanu rode slightly behind Cassie, keeping pace, his gaze steady on the horizon. When they passed a small sign that read Sunset Valley, 82 miles, he raised a low, gloved hand, signaling the distance. Cassie nodded, smiling beneath her visor. 5 riders cut across the glowing highway, each carrying something unseen, grief, love, and the quiet comfort of a stranger who chose to ride beside them. The road stretched endlessly ahead, and none of them felt alone anymore. The miles slipped beneath their wheels like a living dream. The sun, low in the west, drenched the desert highway in molten gold. Heat rippled off the asphalt, and every shadow stretched long and soft across the horizon. Keanu rode beside Cassie, steady and quiet, his black Norton glinting like an old soul under the light. Behind them, Juno, Maya, and Tara followed close, 5 silhouettes moving as one through the endless American desert. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, it hummed. The wind tore past their helmets, carrying traces of sage and dust, the language of the open road. Cassie felt something inside her ease with each mile. The ache of losing Riley didn't vanish, but it changed, softening into something she could breathe with. Every time she looked in the mirror and saw the urn still secure behind her, she whispered in her mind, "We're getting you there, Riles." At a long, straight stretch, Juno pulled up alongside Keanu, giving him a thumbs up before roaring ahead with playful speed. He smiled behind his visor and followed just enough to keep her in sight. The laughter that echoed through their helmets, silent to the world, felt like a small rebellion against grief. When they reached a rest stop near dusk, Cassie called a short break. The group parked their bikes beside a line of faded picnic tables and cracked vending machines. The air was cooling, colors shifting from orange to purple. Keanu took off his gloves, flexing his hands before pulling a small thermos from his bag. "Coffee?" he asked, offering it around. Tara grinned. "You carry coffee in the desert? You're either a genius or insane." He shrugged. "A bit of both, maybe." They shared the drink, passing the thermos between them. The laughter came easy now, like old friends reunited. Cassie found herself watching him not as a movie star, but as a man who understood stillness. There was something deeply human about the way he carried himself, quiet but grounded, like someone who had spent years learning peace the hard way. When they mounted their bikes again, twilight was rolling in. The world was cooling, and the first stars began to show. They rode on toward a small diner someone had seen marked on the map, its flickering neon sign a beacon of civilization. The asphalt turned darker under their wheels. The hum of the engines echoed like a song for the lost. The sight of 5 motorcycles cutting through the blue desert night would later live in Cassie's memory like a movie scene, the one moment when grief gave way to something bigger than sorrow. The neon glow of a roadside diner appeared out of the dusk like a mirage. A weathered sign flickered with the words "Cactus Moon Cafe" and a half-lit picture of a coffee cup. The parking lot was cracked and dusty, with only 2 pickup trucks parked near the edge. Inside, the hum of old lights mixed with the low tune of country music playing from a corner jukebox. Cassie and the others parked their bikes and stretched their sore legs. Keanu followed behind, brushing sand off his jacket. As they walked inside, the smell of fried onions and fresh pie filled the air, comforting and real. They found a booth near the window, where the desert night spread endlessly outside. Juno slid into her seat first, eyes wide as she looked at Keanu across the table. "Okay, I just have to ask," she said, breaking the quiet. "Why do you ride alone? You could have 1,000 people following you, but here you are out here with us." Keanu stirred his coffee slowly, thinking before he answered. "Because sometimes," he said softly, "the road helps you listen to what silence is trying to say." The words landed in the air like something sacred. Even the jukebox seemed quieter for a moment. Cassie watched him, feeling something inside her tighten and release at the same time. She had been running from silence for weeks, keeping busy, pretending strength, anything to avoid the stillness that grief brought. But his words made her realize silence wasn't the enemy. It was the place where healing started. Maya leaned back, wiping her eyes. "That's deep," she murmured. Riley used to say something like that. Said when you ride long enough, your thoughts stop screaming and start whispering what really matters. Keanu nodded with a faint smile. She was right. Their food arrived: burgers, fries, a slice of cherry pie that Juno insisted on sharing. The group ate like people who had been starving for both food and comfort. Laughter returned between bites. Tara teased Maya for nearly fainting earlier in the heat, and Maya threw a fry at her in mock outrage. Keanu smiled quietly through it all, occasionally adding a line or two, never stealing the moment, just adding warmth to it. When they finished, Cassie caught the waitress before she could bring the check. "Split 5 ways," she said, but the waitress smiled and shook her head. "Already taken care of." She nodded toward Keanu. Cassie turned to him, narrowing her eyes playfully. "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged. "I know, but I wanted to. Consider it a toll fee for good company." She smiled. "You're not getting rid of us that easily, you know." He laughed lightly. "Wouldn't dream of it." Outside, the air had cooled. The moon hung low, glowing over the desert plain. Cassie paused before putting on her helmet, looking back through the diner window. Inside, the neon buzzed faintly above the booth where they had sat, the kind of memory she knew would stay long after the miles were gone. The night deepened as they rolled into a quiet roadside motel next door to the diner. The parking lot was lined with faded paint and buzzing yellow lamps that cast long shadows over their bikes. The desert had cooled to a crisp chill, and for the first time all day, they could breathe without feeling scorched. Cassie parked her Harley beside Keanu's Norton. He crouched down beside her bike, checking the rear wheel. "You've got a loose chain," he said, matter of fact. "You should tighten it before it slips." Maya stepped forward. "I've always wanted to learn how to do that myself. Riley used to say, every biker should know their machine like a friend." Keanu smiled, opening his toolkit. Then tonight's lesson 1. They gathered in a half circle under the flickering motel light. He showed Maya how to adjust the tension, how to feel for the right resistance, how to listen to the sound of the chain when it turned just right. The others watched in quiet fascination. It wasn't just about the mechanics, it was the care, the patience, the way he treated the machine like something alive. When Maya finally tightened the bolt correctly, Keanu nodded. "Perfect. You just earned your road stripes." Maya grinned proudly. "Guess I can fix my own breakdown next time." Cassie leaned against her bike, arms folded, watching the scene. "She would have loved this," she said softly. Keanu looked up. "Riley?" Cassie nodded. "She was the one who kept us together, the one who made us laugh when everything fell apart. I didn't realize how hard this would be without her." Loss has a way of making the road feel longer, but you don't have to travel through it alone. The words hung there, carried by the desert wind. Cassie looked at him for a long moment, the fire of the motel sign reflecting in her eyes. Juno clapped her hands suddenly. "All right, this day deserves a toast." She pulled out a flask from her saddlebag. "To Riley, to friendship, to kind strangers." They laughed and each took a sip, the warmth spreading through them. It wasn't alcohol, it was coffee laced with cinnamon, something Riley had always made on long rides. They sat together in the cool silence that followed, the engines cooling beside them, stars spreading across the black sky. Somewhere far off, a train horn echoed, deep and haunting. Cassie finally spoke, voice low but certain. "Thank you for staying, Keanu. You didn't have to." He met her gaze, calm and steady. Nobody should travel through loss alone. The desert seemed to breathe around them, vast and eternal. The sound of the cooling engines faded into quiet peace. 5 riders sat beneath a field of stars, and for the first time since Riley's death, Cassie felt something lift inside her, a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Tomorrow, they would ride again. But tonight, they rested together. Morning broke over the desert with a pale golden light that painted everything in soft warmth. The air was cool, the kind of calm that comes before the sun turns fierce again. The group rode quietly along the open stretch until they spotted a small gas station at the edge of a dusty crossroads. A faded sign read, "Earl's Fuel and Goods, cold soda, hot coffee." They parked in a line beside the pumps, engines cooling with soft metallic ticks. Cassie removed her helmet and stretched her arms, feeling the soreness of the long ride in her shoulders. Juno ran inside to grab snacks, while Maya checked her tire pressure. Keanu stood beside his Norton, leaning against it with a quiet ease, the morning sun glinting off his silver helmet. Cassie walked to Riley's old saddlebag, unbuckling it to grab their map. But as she rummaged through it, her fingers brushed against something hard and small, hidden under a layer of cloth. Curious, she pulled it out. It was a small metal box, weathered and scratched, the kind of box you'd expect to find tucked away in a drawer full of secrets. "What's that?" Tara asked, walking closer. Cassie turned it over in her hands. "I've never seen this before. It must have been Riley's." The latch was a little stiff, but it opened with a faint click. Inside lay a few folded photographs, a worn biker patch that read, "Ride with Heart," and an envelope with 5 names written across it: Cassie, Juno, Maya, Tara, and whoever rides beside them. Cassie's throat tightened. She recognized Riley's handwriting, immediately bold, looping, and confident, just like her. "Should we read it?" Juno asked, her voice soft, almost reverent. Cassie nodded slowly. "Yeah, together." They gathered around the table under the gas station's small awning, where an old fan spun lazily above their heads. Keanu stayed back near his bike, giving them space, but listening quietly. Cassie unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. The paper was worn but clean, carrying that faint scent of oil and lavender, the smell that always clung to Riley's riding gear. Cassie took a deep breath and began to read. "My sisters," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make the trip myself. But don't get too serious on me yet. I don't want tears. I want miles. I want you to ride the long road, the kind that burns your skin and fills your lungs with dust and life. I want you to laugh until your helmets fog up. That's how I'll know you kept me with you." Cassie paused, her voice catching. Maya pressed her hand over Cassie's wrist, steadying her. Juno wiped at her eyes before Cassie continued. "I've learned something about freedom. It's not escaping pain, it's facing it. It's looking straight at the loss and choosing to keep going. Because if you can do that, you'll never really lose the ones you love. You'll carry them, mile after mile." Cassie's voice trembled, but she kept reading. The words seemed to echo through the still morning air, carried by the soft hum of wind and the distant rumble of trucks on the highway. "I used to think dying meant the end of everything I loved. But now I see it's just another turn in the road. The ride doesn't stop, it just changes riders. So promise me something. Don't stop riding because of me. Don't stop laughing. Don't stop forgiving. And when the world feels too heavy, remember that the road can hold your sorrow better than your heart can. Just let it carry you." By the time Cassie reached the end of the paragraph, her voice was shaking. Juno leaned forward, eyes glistening. "She wrote that knowing exactly what we'd need to hear." Tara nodded, her lips pressed tight to keep them from quivering. "She always did. Riley knew us better than we knew ourselves." Cassie took a shaky breath and continued. "If you find this box, there's something else inside a patch I made when we first formed our writing group. Remember? We didn't have a name back then, just a promise to always show up for each other. I stitched this patch to remind us what we stood for. Ride with heart. Not for glory, not for speed, but for meaning." She lifted the old patch from the box and held it up. The edges were frayed, the thread slightly faded, but the red stitching of the words still burned bright in the morning light. The sight of it brought a fresh wave of tears from all 4 women. Maya traced her finger over the fabric. "We made these after that first trip to Yosemite," she whispered. "Remember how she crashed into the coffee stand and still laughed for an hour?" Cassie managed a small, tearful smile. "Yeah, she said the road didn't judge." "There's one last thing," Cassie read aloud. "If you're still carrying my ashes, don't see it as a goodbye. See it as the last stretch we ride together. Take me home to Sunset Valley. Scatter me under that red sky where the mountains meet the light. Then promise me you'll keep going. You don't need to look back. I'll be the wind behind you." The words broke something open in all of them. Juno leaned against the table, sobbing softly. Maya turned away, wiping her face with the back of her glove. Tara closed her eyes and pressed a hand to her chest. Cassie folded the letter carefully, her tears staining the corner of the page. She looked toward Keanu, who had been standing quietly a few feet away. His head was bowed, the sunlight catching on his hair as he listened. When Cassie met his eyes, he stepped closer and spoke in a low, reverent tone. "She sounds like someone who lived wide open." Cassie nodded, her voice breaking. "Yeah, she did. More than any of us." The wind swept gently through the gas station, lifting a few strands of Cassie's hair as she stared down at the letter. The silence that followed felt sacred. No one wanted to move. The patch lay on the table between them, its red stitching glowing faintly in the morning sun. It was as if Riley herself was there, reminding them what they stood for. Keanu finally stepped closer, his voice low and calm. "You know," he said, "most people never find friends who'd carry them this far. That kind of loyalty, it's rare." Cassie looked at him, her eyes tired but shining. "We made her a promise. We're going to keep it." Keanu nodded slowly. "Then let's ride for her." The simple phrase hit deep. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just right, like something the road itself would have said, if it could speak. Cassie folded the letter and placed it carefully back into the box. She tucked the patch into the pocket of her jacket, close to her heart. Juno looked around at the group, her voice trembling but sure. "We'll reach Sunset Valley before sundown tomorrow." That's what she wanted. "Then that's what we'll do," Cassie said firmly. "No stops unless we have to. Just the open road." Keanu smiled faintly. "Good plan. I'll ride behind you. Keep watch. Every convoy needs a tail." Maya wiped her cheeks, laughing softly. "A tail with movie star reflexes. I think we're in good hands." Even Cassie laughed, the sound raw but genuine. It was the first real laughter since Riley's funeral. They packed up quietly. Cassie secured the metal box inside her saddlebag again, this time treating it like a treasure. Juno refilled their canteens while Keanu checked tire pressure on every bike, methodical and patient. He worked like a man who found meaning in small acts of care. When the last bolt was tightened and the engines started again, the air filled with that familiar growl, the rhythm of freedom. Keanu mounted his Norton, gloved hands gripping the handlebars, eyes fixed on the horizon. The women followed, forming their line once more. As they pulled back onto the highway, the wind rushed against them like a blessing. The road stretched forward endlessly, shimmering beneath the brightening sky. Cassie felt lighter somehow, like Riley's spirit had taken the seat right behind her. She glanced to her side and saw Keanu nod slightly, as if reading her thoughts. They didn't speak for miles. They didn't need to. The sound of the engines was enough to a shared heartbeat of remembrance and purpose. By noon, the desert opened into wide plains framed by distant hills. Cassie raised her hand briefly, signaling the group to tighten formation. She looked ahead with new resolve. "Hang on, Riley," she whispered to the wind. "We're bringing you home." And as the miles rolled beneath them, the words of the letter replayed in her heart like a prayer ride. With heart, face the pain, keep going. The morning light melted into a warm haze as the group cut through the desert plains. The air smelled of dust and gasoline, and the hum of 5 engines moved like one continuous note. Cassie led the way, the metal box tucked safely in her saddlebag, the patch from Riley's letter stitched proudly to her jacket now. Every mile they rode, the ache in her chest changed shape, less like a wound, more like a heartbeat. The highway twisted into long curves that wound through low canyons. The rhythm of riding brought memories flooding back, as if Riley herself was there, whispering through the wind. Cassie could almost hear her voice laughing, teasing, shouting over the engines. "Faster, Cass. You ride like someone who's got somewhere to be." Maya smiled inside her helmet, remembering a night years ago when they had camped by the cliffs near Moab. Riley had danced barefoot around a campfire, spinning to the sound of an old speaker, her hair catching the flames' glow. They'd all laughed until their ribs hurt. She had been unstoppable, fearless in every sense. Now, the desert wind carried echoes of that laughter light, haunting, real. Keanu rode behind them, a quiet presence who understood that some grief needed space to breathe. The sound of the road, the way the light bent across the horizon, it all reminded him of the miles he'd once traveled alone after losing friends of his own. He remembered the silence after the last ride, the feeling of being the only one left on the road. A memory rose in him without warning. Years ago, rain had poured over a coastal highway as he pushed his Norton through the downpour. His friend's bike had crashed earlier that night. He had carried a broken helmet, drenched and shivering, walking until the sky turned gray again. That pain, the kind that burns without leaving scars, had never fully left him. The memory faded as quickly as it came. He looked ahead at the four women, their bikes carving through sunlight and shadow. He understood now why he had stopped for them. There was something sacred about carrying someone's memory in motion, something that kept the living tethered to the love that refused to die. As the miles stretched on, Cassie raised her left hand, signaling a stop. They pulled over near the remnants of an old gas station, its sign rusted and tilted, windows broken by time. The silence of the desert returned, thick and endless. They dismounted, stretching sore legs and shoulders. Juno leaned against her bike, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Feels like we've been riding forever," she said. Cassie opened her saddlebag, running her hand over the metal box again. "Every mile feels right," she said quietly. "Like we're getting closer not just to the valley, but to her." Keanu nodded, his voice soft. "That's how it works. You don't move away from people you love. You just move closer to where they live inside you." They rested beside the cracked concrete wall of the abandoned gas station, half shaded by a rusted awning. The building stood silent, its faded paint peeling under years of desert sun. Cassie sat on the curb, tracing circles in the dust with her boot, while the others leaned against their bikes. The faint hum of wind whistled through broken windows, the sound like a sigh. Maya picked up an old soda bottle and turned it in her hands. "Riley would have loved this place," she said. She always liked stopping in the middle of nowhere, said it made her feel small enough to remember what matters. Tara smiled faintly. She once said gas stations are like confession booths for bikers. Everyone's running from something, and everyone needs fuel to keep going. Juno laughed softly. She did say that, and she was always right. Cassie looked down at her gloves, quiet. Her mind was replaying something she hadn't told them yet, something that had been sitting heavy on her chest since the day Riley died. She glanced toward Keanu, who was kneeling by his Norton, wiping down the chain with a rag. He moved with patience, as if every turn of the wrench meant something. "Keanu," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, eyes calm and attentive. "Yeah?" "I keep thinking about something Riley said before she went into the hospital," Cassie began. "She told me she didn't want to leave this world angry. She asked me to forgive her for something stupid. I told her there was nothing to forgive, but there was." The others turned toward her, silent now. "She and I had a fight, months before she got sick," Cassie continued. "I said things I shouldn't have. She asked me to come by one last time before the treatment started, and I didn't. I told myself I was too busy. Truth is, I was just hurt. Then, suddenly she was gone, and I never got to say I was sorry." The confession cracked her voice open. Juno reached out and put a hand on her shoulder, but Cassie shook her head slightly, her eyes glistening. Keanu wiped his hands with the rag and sat down across from her, his tone steady and gentle. "You know," he said, "people think forgiveness is something you give to others. It's something you give yourself, so you can keep them alive inside you." Cassie stared at him, tears threatening to spill. "But I can't change what I did." He shook his head slowly. "You don't need to. What matters is how you carry her now. The road's still ahead. That's your chance to finish the conversation." For a long moment, nobody spoke. The desert wind filled the silence, warm and endless. Cassie finally nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Then I'll do that," she whispered. "I'll finish it on the road." The sun began to dip behind the hills, casting long amber streaks across the cracked asphalt. The silence between them was gentle now, not heavy. Cassie looked out at the open desert. Beyond, the present gas station, the horizon glowing in fading light. She could almost picture Riley out there, hair flying, jacket open, chasing the sunset with that wild grin that never faded. Keanu stood, stretching his arms, his voice quiet but firm. "You know, guilt is just love that doesn't know where to go," he said. "But you've already turned it into something better. You're riding for her, keeping her story moving. That's how love finds its way again." Cassie looked up at him, her eyes red but calmer. "You really believe that?" "I've had to," he said softly. "I've lost people I wasn't ready to lose. Friends, family, people who left before I could say what mattered. For a long time, I carried that weight like a passenger I couldn't drop off. But the road taught me something. It doesn't erase pain, it just gives it direction." Maya nodded slowly. "That's beautiful." Keanu gave a faint smile. "It's just true. The road doesn't judge, it just keeps going. It lets you do the same." The words settled over them like a kind of peace. Tara kicked at the dust and looked toward the horizon. "We should probably move before it gets dark." Cassie nodded. "Yeah, Riley wouldn't forgive us if we missed another sunset." They packed up, engines rumbling to life one by one. The abandoned station stood behind them like a ghost from another time, its windows glowing briefly in the light of their headlights before fading into the dark. As they rode again, the world around them turned into shades of copper and violet. The sky deepened, the stars beginning to appear one by one. The road curved gently through the desert, and the rhythm of their ride fell into perfect sync once more. Cassie felt a strange calm wash over her. The guilt that had been gnawing at her for months seemed to soften. She could almost hear Riley's laughter in the wind, playful and forgiving. She whispered through her helmet, "I'm sorry, Riles. I should have come sooner, but I'm here now." Keanu, riding slightly behind her, could see the way her shoulders relaxed, the way her posture straightened with quiet resolve. He smiled inside his helmet, saying nothing. Some things didn't need words. By the time they reached the next long stretch of road, the desert had fallen silent, except for the sound of their engines. The moon hung low and full, bathing everything in silver light. Cassie raised her hand briefly. Two fingers pointing skyward, a silent gesture Riley used to make whenever she felt free. The others mirrored it, 5 hands rising against the stars. Keanu followed suit, his hands steady on the throttle. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt complete in spirit. The sky began to change before they even realized what was coming. It started with a strange stillness, the kind that makes the air feel too heavy, the light too sharp. The road ahead shimmered, not from heat this time, but from the haze of wind carrying grains of dust. 50 miles from Sunset Valley, the horizon turned a bruised shade of gray. Cassie looked up at the clouds gathering fast. "That doesn't look good," she said into her helmet mic. Keanu's voice came through steady. "We'll keep pace. If it worsens, we'll find cover." The wind picked up in seconds. Sand began to lash against their visors, blurring the world around them. The once clear road became a storm of motion and color, the desert itself rising up like a living thing. Cassie's heart pounded. She could barely see Juno's taillight through the swirling dust. "Stay close," Keanu called, his voice cutting through the static. He slowed his speed, motioning with one hand for them to form up. The group tightened into a small line behind him, their engines straining against the gusts. Maya's voice cracked through the comms. "I can't see! My back wheel's slipping!" Keanu scanned the right side of the road and spotted the outline of an old fence leading toward what looked like a structure half collapsed but standing. "There," he shouted. "Off the highway, follow me." He turned sharply, leading them through a narrow break in the fence and down a short dirt path. The wind howled louder, tearing at their jackets. Lightning forked across the sky, followed by the deep growl of thunder rolling over the flat land. The rain began in fat, violent drops that quickly turned into sheets. They reached a large, weather-beaten barn just as the storm hit full force. The wooden doors creaked as Keanu pushed one open. The others rode their bikes inside, gravel crunching beneath the tires. The moment the doors closed behind them, the sound outside roared like an ocean made of wind. Cassie pulled off her helmet, breathing hard. Her hair was plastered to her face with sweat and rain. Juno coughed, rubbing at her eyes. "I thought we were going to lose the road back there," she said. Maya ran to the back of her bike, panic flashing in her eyes. "The urn, oh God, please tell me it's okay." Cassie hurried over, kneeling by the saddlebag where the small metal box rested. She opened it, her fingers trembling. The urn sat untouched, a few grains of sand clinging to its surface. Relief flooded her voice. "It's safe." Maya pressed a hand to her heart. "I thought," Keanu's calm voice interrupted gently. "You did good. You kept your focus. That's what saves people in storms like this." Outside, thunder cracked again. The whole barn shook. The rain hammered the roof like 1,000 fists. Inside, the group huddled together, soaked and shivering, surrounded by the smell of wet wood and gasoline. The wind howled through cracks in the walls, making the barn moan like something alive. Cassie found an old tarp and dragged it across the floor, spreading it out so they could sit together. Keanu moved through the dim space, scanning the corners until he found a pile of old wooden crates and a few broken planks. "Dry enough," he said, testing the wood with his boot. "We can make a fire. It'll help us stay warm until the worst passes." He crouched down, striking a match. The tiny spark flickered, died, then caught again, glowing orange in the half-dark. Within minutes, a small fire crackled in the middle of the barn, sending soft shadows dancing across their faces. The warmth hit them instantly, pulling steam from their soaked clothes. Maya huddled close, her hands shaking. "I've never seen a storm like that," she whispered. "It came out of nowhere." Juno nodded. "It's like the sky just broke open." Keanu stared into the fire, his voice calm and low. "The desert does that sometimes. Looks peaceful, then reminds you who's in charge." Cassie sat a few feet away, her jacket still dripping. The glow of the fire reflected in her eyes, making them look deeper, softer. "Feels like life, doesn't it?" she said quietly. "You think you're in control, and then everything changes in a second." Keanu looked at her. "And yet, here we are, still riding." That simple truth hung in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. The fire popped, sending tiny sparks up toward the rafters. Rain thundered on the tin roof, and the storm outside seemed to grow louder, as if mirroring the turmoil inside them all. Tara sighed, pulling her knees to her chest. "I keep thinking about what Riley would say right now." Cassie smiled faintly. "She'd probably laugh at us for hiding from the weather." "No," Maya said, shaking her head. "She'd say something poetic, like, 'Every storm's got its own kind of mercy.'" Keanu's eyes lifted slightly. "That's a good line," he said. "She sounds like she saw beauty where most people saw chaos." Cassie stared into the fire. "She did. Always. She used to tell me the sky looks better right after it rains. She said storms clean the road for new stories." Juno let out a quiet breath. She wasn't wrong. Lightning flashed, filling the barn with blinding white for a second. Cassie blinked against it, her heart skipping. When the thunder rolled, it sounded close enough to shake the floor. The group instinctively leaned in toward one another, finding comfort in the closeness. Keanu reached for another plank, feeding it into the fire. His voice was almost a whisper. "Storms don't always come to destroy things," he said. "Sometimes they come to clear what's been buried too long." Cassie glanced at him, the meaning of his words settling deep inside. She nodded slowly. "Then maybe this one's doing its job." The storm raged on, a wild symphony of thunder, rain, and sand pounding the walls. The group sat close to the fire, their clothes steaming in the heat, the smell of smoke mixing with wet earth. Every flash of lightning threw their shadows against the wooden walls like moving ghosts, reminders of all the people and moments they carried within them. Maya broke the silence first, her voice small and raw. "I thought the wind was going to tear us apart out there. I kept thinking, what if we don't make it? What if this is how it ends?" Keanu looked up, his expression calm, almost reflective. "You made it," he said softly, "because you didn't stop. Fear's loud, but so is courage. You just have to listen to the right one." Cassie looked at the urn, now resting on a crate near the fire. "Funny," she said, her voice trembling. "Riley always wanted us to see things like this as adventures. She'd probably say the storm was her way of checking if we were still tough enough to finish the ride." Juno laughed through her tears. She would. She loved the drama. Even Tara smiled, brushing hair from her damp face. She'd probably take a selfie right now, with lightning behind her, and say, "Ride it out, sisters." Their laughter was weak, but real, carrying through the sound of rain. Keanu poked the fire gently with a stick, the flames rising higher. "She sounds like the kind of person who never wasted a second," he said. Cassie's eyes softened. "She didn't. She was the reason we all started writing. Said it was the only way to feel both free and connected at the same time." Keanu nodded. She was right about that. Writing forces you to face yourself. There's no place to hide on the open road. Outside, the thunder began to fade, replaced by the rhythmic patter of steady rain. The tension in the air slowly eased, replaced by a quiet peace. The storm had spent itself, leaving the world washed and still. Cassie stood and walked to the barn door, pushing it open just enough to look outside. The desert stretched before her, glistening under a faint silver light. The rain had smoothed the dust into soft earth, the air cool and clean. The smell of wet sage filled her lungs. She turned back to the group. "It's slowing down." Keanu rose beside her, stepping into the doorway. The wind brushed through his hair as he watched the last drops fall. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the world throws storms at us, not to break us, but to wash something clean." The words seemed to settle over everyone like a blanket. Cassie looked out at the clearing sky, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then maybe this one washed away the guilt, the fear, the doubt." Keanu gave a small nod. "Maybe it did." Dawn began to rise beyond the distant hills, spreading pale light across the soaked ground. The rain stopped completely, and the desert exhaled, shining with quiet renewal. The storm had passed, but what it left behind felt like rebirth. Keanu straddled his Norton, adjusted his gloves, and gave the chain one last pull. It held firm, stretched tight between his bike and Maya's. The sun climbed higher as the others watched in uneasy silence. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, no cars, no towns, just miles of heat and wind. Cassie looked over at Maya. "You sure about this?" Maya nodded, brushing tears from her dusty face. "If he's willing to pull, I'm willing to roll." Keanu glanced back, eyes calm behind his visor. "All right then, stay centered. Don't brake unless I tell you." With one smooth motion, he twisted the throttle. The Norton growled to life and began to move forward. The chain rattled, then straightened as Maya's Harley followed, wobbling slightly before finding balance. The group fell in behind him, forming a slow procession through the desert. The speed was barely 20 miles an hour, but it was movement steady, determined, unbroken. The effort was brutal. Every few minutes, Keanu's shoulders tensed from the strain. The heat returned with force, bouncing off the road in shimmering waves. Sweat soaked his shirt beneath the leather. Still, he kept going. Juno rode beside Cassie, her voice crackling over the helmet comms. "He's really doing it. He's towing a full-size Harley through the desert." Cassie's voice was low. "He's not just pulling her bike. He's pulling all of us forward." The miles dragged by slowly. Cars began to appear in the distance now, speeding past in the opposite lane. Some honked, others slowed to film what they were seeing. A famous actor hauling a broken-down motorcycle through the heart of nowhere, refusing to leave a stranger behind. But Keanu didn't notice the attention. His focus stayed on the road, his hands steady, his breathing measured. Every vibration through the handlebars reminded him that endurance was its own kind of faith. Behind him, Maya gripped her handlebars tight. The bike jerked. Occasionally, the chain clanging over bumps, but she refused to let go. Every mile that passed made her cry harder, not from fear, but from disbelief at what she was witnessing. After nearly an hour of slow progress, Keanu raised his hand, signaling a stop. They pulled over beside a lone gas station surrounded by red sand and tall weeds. The old pump stood faded and rust-streaked, but the place was open. Cassie jumped off her bike, rushing over. "You okay?" Keanu nodded, exhaling hard. "We made some distance. Let's get water before we keep going." Inside the small convenience shop, the air smelled of dust and old coffee. The clerk, a middle-aged man in a trucker hat, looked up in disbelief. "Wait a second," he said. "Are you—" Keanu held up a hand, gently, smiling. "Doesn't matter who I am. We just need water and some oil rags if you've got them." The man nodded, still stunned. "You got it." The man hurried out from behind the counter with bottled water and a handful of old rags. He stopped at the door, staring at the sight outside the black Norton, dusty and strained, chained to a heavy Harley glistening under the desert sun. Maya was sitting beside it, her face still wet with tears but glowing with something stronger now: gratitude. Cassie took the water bottles and handed one to Keanu first. He drank slowly, tilting his head back, his throat working with quiet exhaustion. The others followed, gulping down the relief that only water could give after hours in heat and wind. The store clerk lingered near the doorway, watching silently. "You were towing her bike all the way out here?" he asked, incredulous. Keanu nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Couldn't leave it behind. Couldn't leave her behind." The man blinked a few times, visibly moved. "That's something you don't see every day." Maya smiled weakly. He just wouldn't stop. The man looked down, embarrassed by his own emotion, then said, "Most people these days, they just call for help or drive away. Guess there's still good people on the road after all." Keanu's voice stayed calm, almost fatherly. "There are. You just have to be one to find them." The clerk nodded, then reached into the cooler, pulling out 2 extra bottles. "These are on me," he said, "for the road." "Thank you," Cassie said softly. When they stepped back outside, the sun was starting its slow descent, casting long shadows across the highway. The air was cooler now, tinged with the smell of rain left behind by the morning storm. Keanu rechecked the chain, tightening one of the links and making sure the connection was secure. His movements were methodical, steady, patient, kind. Cassie leaned against her bike, watching him. "You didn't have to go this far," she said quietly. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "That's the thing about going far," he said. "You don't realize how far you'll go until someone needs you to." There was a pause then, Maya whispered. "You've got no idea what this means to me." He gave her a faint smile. "Maybe I do." A pickup truck pulled into the station just then, the driver slowing as he noticed the strange scene. A movie star, 4 bikers, and a towing chain glinting between 2 motorcycles. He pulled out his phone, aiming it toward them. Keanu lifted a hand and called out calmly, "Please, don't film us, just lend a hand." The driver hesitated, then lowered his phone. He stepped out of the truck and walked over. "What do you need?" "Help her push the bike to refill the oil tank," Keanu said, motioning toward Maya. Without a word, the man joined them, hands on the handlebars. Together, they rolled the Harley under the shade of the roof. No fame, no spotlight, just people helping people. That simple image, Keanu Reeves towing a broken Harley through the desert, refusing attention, asking only for kindness, would later spread across the internet. But for those who were there, it wasn't about the story. It was about the silence after, when 5 riders stood side by side in the fading light, knowing they'd just witnessed something pure. Cassie placed a hand on the urn strapped to her bike. "Let's finish the ride," she said. Keanu nodded. Together. Engines roared again. The chain rattled once more as they pulled back onto the highway. 5 hearts, beating in rhythm with the road. The desert turned to twilight by the time they found the small roadside motel. A neon sign buzzed faintly above the office door, half the letters flickering so it read MOL instead of motel. The place looked forgotten by time paint peeling, parking lot cracked, but to the group, it felt like shelter. They parked their bikes side by side beneath the flickering sign. Keanu shut off his Norton and stretched, rolling his shoulders after the long day. Cassie took a deep breath of the cooling air, the smell of dust and fuel still clinging to her. "We're staying here?" she asked, half amused. "Unless you want to sleep standing," Juno said, her voice tired but playful. Inside, the motel clerk handed over 2 keys without even looking up from the small television flickering behind the counter. "Rooms 7 and 8, he said. "Hot water, if you're lucky." They laughed, too exhausted to care. The rooms were small, the walls thin enough to hear every creak. Cassie shared one with Tara and Maya, while Keanu and Juno took the room next door. The air conditioner rattled weakly as they unpacked, and someone found an old vending machine outside selling soda for $1. After showering, the women sat together on the 2 worn beds, hair damp, dressed in t-shirts, and comfort. The adrenaline of the day had faded, replaced by a quiet peace that felt like survival. Maya held the urn in her lap, tracing its rim softly. "We're almost there," she whispered. Tara nodded. "Tomorrow, she goes home." Cassie looked at them both, her voice softer than a whisper. "I keep thinking about what happens after that. What do we do when it's over?" They fell silent. It was a question none of them had dared to ask before. Later, when the others began to drift toward sleep, Cassie found herself staring at the ceiling, wide awake. The hum of the neon light outside flickered through the thin curtains, casting faint flashes of pink and blue across the room. Finally, she slipped on her boots, grabbed her jacket, and stepped outside. The night was cool, the stars wide and clear above the desert. The air felt alive with quiet. She noticed Keanu sitting alone under the sign, his elbows resting on his knees, staring at the sky like a man listening to something only he could hear. "Can't sleep?" he asked, without turning his head. Cassie smiled faintly. "How'd you guess?" He looked over, eyes calm and kind. "People who carry heavy hearts don't sleep much." She walked over and sat beside him on the old wooden bench. "You got that right." For a while they just sat there in silence, the sound of crickets filling the night. Then he spoke again, his voice low and thoughtful. "You ever think about how love doesn't really end?" Cassie turned to him, unsure how to answer. He continued, looking at the stars. "It just changes form. The people we lose, they don't stop being part of us. They just move from our arms to our memory. And memory doesn't fade if you keep living in a way they'd be proud of." Cassie looked up at the stars, their light trembling against the dark sky. "I want to believe that," she said quietly. "But sometimes it feels like the closer I get to letting go, the further away she feels." Keanu leaned back slightly, resting his hands on the bench. "Letting go isn't forgetting," he said. "It's trusting that love knows how to travel. You don't need to hold on tight for it to stay." Cassie turned to him, her eyes glistening. "I'm scared," she admitted. "When this trip ends, I don't know who I'll be without her. The road gave me a purpose. After tomorrow, what then?" He looked at her, his voice calm but certain. "Then keep moving. Love is motion. It keeps us from turning into stone." The words settled deep, echoing in the quiet space between them. Cassie exhaled slowly, feeling something inside her unclench. "You really believe that?" He nodded. "Every time I've stopped moving, I've started losing myself. Grief freezes you if you let it. The trick is to keep riding 1 mile, 1 day, 1 act of kindness at a time." She smiled faintly. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," he said, "but it's worth it." They sat together in silence again, the neon sign flickering above them like a heartbeat. Cassie thought of Riley, of laughter, of engines, of 1,000 miles shared across countless roads. She realized that maybe, just maybe, Riley wasn't behind them at all. She was here, stitched into the wind, sitting between them in the quiet. Back inside the motel room, Maya, Juno, and Tara were still awake. The light was dim, the air thick with that late-night kind of honesty that only comes after shared loss. They had placed Riley's photo on the windowsill, letting the moonlight fall across it. Her grin in that photo, wild, defiant, alive, seemed to glow in the pale light. Tara held up a soda can. "To Riley," she said softly, They each lifted theirs in response. To Riley, Maya echoed, her eyes shining. The one who rode with heart. Juno smiled, brushing at her tears. And never checked the weather. Laughter filled the small room, fragile but healing. It wasn't loud or forced, it was real. Outside, Keanu stood and walked to Maya's damaged Harley, parked beneath the neon sign. He knelt beside it, flashlight in hand, examining the torn engine housing. He found a small crack he plighted, hadn't noticed before, and pulled out his toolkit. The sound of clinking metal echoed softly through the night. Cassie joined him after a moment. "You're still working?" He gave her a tired smile. "I don't like leaving things unfinished." The minutes passed quietly. The others, hearing the faint noise, came outside too. They stood in their pajamas under the flickering light, watching as Keanu tightened one final bolt. He turned the key and stepped back. The engine hesitated, then came alive, with a soft, steady rumble. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Maya covered her mouth with her hands and began to cry. "She's alive," she whispered. Cassie looked at Keanu. "You did it." He wiped his hands, his smile gentle. "No," he said. "She did. She just needed a little faith." The Harley idled under the moonlight, its sound like a heartbeat, steady and familiar. The women stood around it in awe, tears glinting in the silver glow. Cassie glanced upward at the stars. "She's here," she murmured. "I can feel her." They all nodded silently. In that fragile hour, between exhaustion and dawn, the desert was full of spirit again, alive with memory, motion, and the quiet hum of something eternal. Morning came quietly, washing the desert in soft gold. The motel neon had gone dark, and a thin mist hung over the horizon like breath over still water. Cassie stepped outside first, the air cool against her face. She could smell the faint sweetness of sage carried by the wind. Behind her, the others emerged one by one, stretching, yawning, alive. Keanu stood by his Norton, tightening the last strap on his saddlebag. He looked up as the sun rose over the distant ridges. "Good day for the final ride," he said softly. Cassie nodded, holding the urn against her chest. "She'd like this light," she said. "It feels like her." They fueled up at the small station next to the motel, grabbed coffee, and rolled out together. The road stretched straight ahead, endless and gleaming. As the sun climbed higher, the horizon began to open. The flat desert gave way to waves of red earth and distant canyons carved deep and wide. It felt as if the world itself was unfolding before them. The wind was gentler now, not harsh or biting. It wrapped around them like a welcome. Cassie felt her throat tighten as she rode, the weight of the urn pressing lightly against her back. Juno rode beside her, giving a small thumbs up, and Tara followed close, her face calm and still. Maya's repaired Harley ran smooth and strong, the engine humming like a quiet prayer. They were nearing Sunset Valley. When they reached the first overlook, Cassie raised her hand. The bikes slowed to a stop one by one, their engines fading into a deep silence. The view before them took their breath away. Below stretched the valley. Riley had always talked about the golden basin surrounded by cliffs painted in shades of rust and rose. Green patches of sage and brittle brush dotted the landscape, and in the distance, the dry riverbed shimmered with reflected light. It looked almost unreal, like something pulled straight from Riley's stories. Cassie took off her helmet, her hair whipping softly in the wind. "Almost home," she whispered, her voice breaking. The others removed their helmets too, standing beside her in quiet reverence. The only sounds were the wind, the distant cry of a hawk, and the faint ticking of cooling engines. Keanu stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the valley. His voice was calm, grounded, almost sacred. "This is where the road stops asking why," he said. Cassie turned to him, her eyes wet. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "Every road we travel asks us what we're searching for. Peace, forgiveness, meaning. But at some point the road stops asking, because it knows you've found what you came for." She nodded slowly, clutching the urn tighter. "Then we found it." Keanu looked out over the horizon again. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You did." They parked their bikes near the edge of the overlook, engines cooling with soft metallic clicks. The air was warm, filled with the scent of sage and dust, the kind of scent that stays with you long after the road ends. Cassie set the urn down on a rock, her fingers tracing its smooth surface. "She always said she wanted her last view to be from up high," she murmured. Maya nodded, her eyes following the curves of the valley. She used to talk about this place like it was heaven, said it's where she first learned to ride with her dad. Tara smiled through her tears. "She told me once that when the sun hit the canyon walls just right, it looked like fire meeting gold. She said that's what freedom feels like." Juno stepped closer, her voice shaking. "We made it, Riley. We brought you home." Keanu took a few slow steps toward the edge of the cliff, looking down at the glowing valley below. He reached down and picked a small wildflower growing from a crack in the stone. Its petals were white with a faint blush of pink trembling gently in the wind. He turned it in his fingers for a moment, then set it beside the urn. "No journey is ever wasted," he said softly. Cassie swallowed hard. She'd love that. Keanu looked at her, his tone gentle. "Then let's give her what she asked for." They decided to wait for sunset to scatter her ashes, wanting to give Riley the moment she dreamed of: the red sky, the falling light, the valley glowing like fire. While they waited, each of them took out a small scrap of paper from their saddlebags. Keanu watched quietly as they began to write. Cassie's pen moved slowly. Her letter was simple, but honest. "I'm sorry for the words I never said. Thank you for loving us when we were hard to love. You changed how I see the world. Ride easy, Riles." Juno wrote about the first time she rode with Riley and how she'd fallen trying to copy her style. "You laughed until I joined in. You made falling feel like flying. I'll never forget that." Maya's note was short. "You taught me to keep my hands on the bars and my heart on the road." Tara's was the quietest. "You were my compass. Now I'll learn to follow your stars." Keanu didn't write a note. Instead, he crouched beside the urn and carefully added the wildflower he'd found. His voice was calm when he spoke. "We leave what words can't carry." Cassie nodded. They placed each folded note gently inside the urn, the papers resting together like whispers. When they closed the lid, the air seemed to still around them. They sat for a while in silence, watching the light change over the valley. The cliffs turned red, then orange, then gold, as if the earth itself was burning gently with life. The wind brushed against them, warm and soft. Cassie smiled faintly through her tears. "She's almost home," she said. Keanu looked out over the horizon one last time. "She already is." The group stood together, the sun slowly sinking behind them, their shadows long against the earth. And in that quiet, endless moment, it felt as though the road itself had finally exhaled. The sun hovered low over the rim of the valley, turning the cliffs to fire. Long shadows stretched across the ground as the group climbed the final ridge on foot, helmets in hand. Their bikes rested behind them, engines cooling in the hush of evening. The sky had begun its transformation from pale gold to deep orange, then to crimson. Every shade of light seemed to paint the moment with meaning. Cassie carried the urn carefully, wrapped in a scarf Riley used to wear. The wind brushed at her hair and tugged at the scarf's edges, as if guiding her forward. The others followed close behind Juno with her camera tucked away, Maya carrying a small bundle of wildflowers, and Tara clutching Riley's photo against her chest. Keanu walked a few paces behind them, quiet and steady, his eyes on the horizon. At the ridge, they stopped. Below them stretched Sunset Valley in its full glory, the canyon walls burning with reflected light, the air shimmering as if alive. The wind that rose from the valley floor was warm, carrying the scent of earth and sage. It wrapped around them like a memory that refused to fade. Cassie took a deep breath. "This is it," she said softly. "This is where she wanted to be." The others nodded, their eyes fixed on the valley below. Maya whispered, "It's beautiful." She'd be laughing right now, telling us we made it just in time. Cassie smiled faintly through her tears. She always hated being late. Juno laughed weakly, wiping her cheeks. And she'd still be the last one to show up. The laughter broke something open. For the first time, the grief felt light enough to carry. Cassie knelt and placed the urn on the ground. Her hands trembled as she untied the scarf. The metal caught the sun, glowing softly. For a moment she hesitated. The weight of it felt heavier than it should, like it contained more than ashes. It carried years of friendship, forgiveness, and unfinished conversations. Keanu stepped closer but didn't speak. His presence was enough. Cassie lifted the lid slowly. The wind stirred, playful and tender, as if waiting. She looked up at the others. "You ready?" They nodded. Together, they stepped closer to the edge of the ridge. Cassie raised the urn, holding it with both hands. The setting sun bathed them in red and gold light. She whispered, her voice trembling, "We love you, Riley. You're home now." She tilted the urn, and the ashes began to drift out. The wind caught them instantly, scattering them across the valley in a shimmering veil. The light turned each particle into something magical, tiny sparks that danced and disappeared into the glowing air. The women gasped softly, watching as the ashes rose, fell, and finally blended with the horizon. It looked as though the sunset itself was welcoming her. Cassie whispered, "Ride free, sister." The wind quieted after a while, as if even nature understood the moment's weight. The air turned still and sacred. Cassie closed the urn gently and pressed the scarf to her heart, her shoulders shaking. Maya stepped forward, placing her wildflowers on the edge of the cliff. Their petals fluttered briefly before the wind carried them away to join the ashes below. Juno wrapped her arms around Tara, and soon all four women were locked in an embrace, their tears mingling with laughter that trembled at the edge of breaking. It was the kind of release that only comes after miles of silence and pain. Keanu stood a few steps behind them, head bowed. The sunset reflected in his eyes, making them look deep and steady like the horizon itself. He let the silence linger until the wind settled, then spoke softly, his words carried gently through the still air. "No journey is over if you travel with love," he said. The women turned toward him, their faces streaked with tears, but there was peace in their expressions now. Cassie nodded slowly. "She's still riding with us," she whispered. "She always will be," he replied. The valley below glowed like a living flame, the last rays of sunlight setting the cliffs ablaze. It was as if Riley's spirit had become part of the sky, stretching wide and unending. Cassie took one final look at the fading light, then closed her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind. When she opened them again, Juno was holding up her phone, hesitating. "Should I record this?" she asked softly. Cassie thought for a moment, then nodded. "Just for us," she said. "Not for anyone else." Juno pressed record, capturing a few quiet seconds, the glowing valley, the women's silhouettes, and Keanu standing just behind them, the wind tugging at his jacket. No one posed, no one spoke. It was pure, simple, and real. That small clip would later be shared between them as a reminder of what love looked like when it had no audience, only truth. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, they lingered in the fading glow, unwilling to leave. Then, slowly, they began to make their way back to the bikes. The air was cool now, touched with the scent of rain and dust. The world felt different, emptier, yet somehow fuller at the same time. Keanu was the last to mount his bike. Cassie looked over at him, her voice soft. "Thank you for staying with us." He started the engine, its low rumble blending with the others. "No one should ride through loss alone," he said. Cassie smiled, nodding. "Then let's ride her home one last time." The engines roared to life, echoing across the valley walls. As they descended the ridge, the twilight deepened into blue, the stars beginning to appear one by one above them. They rode in formation, their headlights stretching out across the open road, glowing like a moving constellation. The wind met them again, softer now, carrying whispers of laughter they could almost recognize. Behind them, Sunset Valley glowed faintly in the distance, golden, quiet, eternal. And somewhere in that vastness, Riley rode with them still. 3 days after the sunset farewell, Cassie sat on her porch in California, her helmet still hanging from the handlebars of her Harley. The ride home had been long, quiet, and healing. Each mile put a little more peace between her and the storm that once lived in her chest. But that evening, as she scrolled through her phone, something stopped her cold. Juno's video, the one she'd quietly filmed during the farewell, had somehow found its way online. It had started with a small biker forum post titled "Keanu Reeves Rides with Grieving Women in Sunset Valley." Within hours, it spread to every corner of the internet. The short clip played with no music, no filters, no edits. It showed the 5 riders standing on the ridge, the sun glowing behind them, the ashes lifting into the air like golden dust. Keanu stood a few steps back, head bowed, the wind tugging at his jacket. His voice could barely be heard over the wind as he said, "No journey is over if you travel with love." That one sentence struck the world like lightning. Cassie watched the comments scroll faster than she could read them. People from every country wrote their stories: loss, forgiveness, healing. A man from Texas said he scattered his brother's ashes on a fishing dock and finally felt peace. A woman from Japan wrote that she'd forgiven her father after 10 years of silence. Someone else said they hadn't ridden a bike in 20 years but were buying one tomorrow. The clip reached millions within a day. News outlets picked it up with headlines like, "Keanu Reeves joins bikers on a spiritual ride through the desert," and "A moment of humanity in the age of noise." Cassie's phone buzzed non-stop. Calls came from reporters, journalists, even talk show producers. Juno messaged her in disbelief. "I swear I didn't post it public," she wrote. "Someone must have shared it." Cassie smiled at the screen. Maybe it needed to be seen. Meanwhile, in his quiet home, tucked near the Hollywood Hills, Keanu sat at his kitchen table with a mug of coffee and watched the same clip. The light from his laptop flickered across his face as the sound of the desert wind played softly through the speakers. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just listened. The world was talking about him again, but he wasn't listening to that part. What mattered to him were the comments. He read them one by one, his expression unreadable, but his eyes soft. One in particular made him pause. It was from a young woman who wrote, "I watched this with my mom. We both cried. Maybe we'll talk again tomorrow." He closed the laptop gently. The message was enough. Outside, the evening sky turned the same shade of gold as the one in the valley. He walked out to his garage, passing his motorcycles lined neatly in a row. His Norton still carried dust from the trip. He brushed his hand along the tank, smiling quietly to himself. Keanu stood in the garage for a long time, the smell of oil and old leather filling the air. The Norton's chain still carried faint scratches from towing Maya's Harley across the desert. He smiled at the memory, the strain, the heat, the laughter afterward. The internet could never capture what that moment really felt like, but he didn't need it to. Some things were sacred because they lived only in memory. He picked up his phone, ignoring the dozens of missed calls from agents and journalists. Instead, he opened a quiet browser tab and typed in the name of a small nonprofit foundation he'd once read about, Ride Forward Women Riders for Change. The group helped women learn motorcycle safety, sponsored gear, and offered scholarships for mechanics training. Without hesitation, he made a donation. No message, no name, no press release. Just the quiet act of adding fuel to someone else's journey. Across the country, the biker community was buzzing. Forums filled with new riders, veterans, and mechanics sharing the clip. Many called it a symbol of unity, of what the open road meant beyond leather jackets and chrome. For a few days, it wasn't about celebrity or fame. It was about compassion, grief, and motion. One headline read, "Brotherhood has no gender. Keanu's ride with Sisters of the Road inspires millions." Another said, "When kindness leads the way. The ride that healed a nation's heart." Cassie woke the next morning to hundreds of messages. Some came from strangers, others from women who said they'd lost someone too. One woman wrote, "My daughter passed last year. Watching you scatter those ashes reminded me that love doesn't end, it just keeps moving." Cassie forwarded that message to Juno, Maya, and Tara. Each of them replied within minutes. Maya's message was short. She'd be proud of us. Tara added, no, she'd be laughing that we went viral without trying. Juno sent a picture of her new tattoo, a small emblem that read, Ride with Heart, the same word stitched on Riley's old patch. Beneath it, she wrote, The road lives on. That night, a popular talk show host mentioned the story. You've seen the clip, 5 bikers, a golden valley, and the world's most humble actor standing behind them. It's not a movie scene, it's real life. Maybe that's why people can't stop watching. Still, Keanu said nothing. No interviews, no public appearances. Just silence, the kind that meant more than any statement could. But his quiet action didn't go unnoticed. A week later, Ride Forward received an anonymous donation large enough to fund training for dozens of new riders. When the organization's director tried to contact the sender, the form only said, Keep the road open for everyone. Back in Sunset Valley, Cassie and the others returned months later to see the first blooms of spring. The air was softer, filled with the hum of life returning. They rode together again, stopping at the same overlook. The ashes were long gone, but the wind still carried something familiar. Cassie looked out over the glowing canyon and smiled. She's still here, she whispered. Tara nodded. So are we. And miles away, in his quiet garage, Keanu started his Norton again. The engine roared softly to life, steady, alive, ready for another road. The morning sun rose over the Nevada horizon, gleaming off rows of motorcycles lined up along a long stretch of asphalt. Engines purred, leather jackets rustled, and the air buzzed with that familiar mix of fuel and freedom. Banners fluttered overhead reading The Ashes Ride in honor of Riley Brooks. It had been 6 weeks since the viral video. What began as a private farewell between friends had grown into something far greater, a call for unity. Riders had come from across the country, some traveling hundreds of miles just to be part of the journey. There were veterans in faded denim vests, mothers riding pillion behind their sons, and strangers who'd never met before but felt bound by the same invisible thread. Cassie stood near the starting line, her black helmet tucked under her arm. The patch on her jacket, Ride with Heart, caught the light. Juno, Tara, and Maya stood beside her, all wearing the same emblem now. Nearby, Keanu adjusted the straps on his gloves, his Norton gleaming quietly among the endless sea of bikes. A small stage had been set up with a simple microphone. Cassie stepped up, her voice carried by the desert wind. 6 weeks ago, we rode across this same stretch of road to bring our sister Riley home, she began. We thought it was just for us to say goodbye, to let go, but the road had other plans. It carried our story farther than we ever imagined, and somehow it brought all of you here. The crowd was silent, listening. She was wild, kind, and fearless. She believed that the road could heal broken things. Today, we ride not for sorrow, but for what she stood for: freedom, forgiveness, and the kind of kindness that problem doesn't ask for applause. Her eyes found Keanu's in the crowd. I want to thank the man who reminded us that kindness is the real horsepower. The one who didn't just help fix a bike, but helped fix our hearts. The crowd applauded, not loud or wild, but heartfelt. Keanu bowed his head slightly, a modest smile crossing his face. Cassie's voice softened. Wherever you came from, whoever you've lost, this ride is for them too. Let's carry their names with us today. Let's keep the road open for everyone. She stepped down, her friends hugging her as she rejoined them. The engines started one by one, filling the air with a deep, thunderous hum that shook the ground. Keanu swung a leg over his Norton and glanced toward Cassie. She gave a nod. Ready? He asked through the roar. Always, she replied. The engines surged together, hundreds of headlights flickering to life, like a river of stars on asphalt. The front line rolled forward, tires kicking dust into the wind as they began their ride. The convoy moved as one, a breathtaking sight of chrome and color gliding down the desert highway. The rhythmic hum of hundreds of engines created a sound that felt almost like a heartbeat. a living pulse of unity echoing across the land Riley once loved. Keanu rode near the front beside Cassie, his eyes steady on the horizon. The wind whipped through their jackets, and the sun reflected off the helmets ahead, forming streaks of light that shimmered like moving water. From above, a few drones captured the spectacle, a vast river of riders stretching for miles, flowing like freedom itself. Cassie looked to her left, watching the line of motorcycles curve around a bend. "She'd be losing her mind right now," she called over the roar. Keanu grinned. "Then let's make it count." They sped up slightly, leading the pack as the desert unfolded around them in every shade of gold and rust. The open sky felt endless. Strangers rode side by side, some raising their hands in silent tribute as they passed the landmarks from the first journey. The cracked gas station, the ridge in the distance, the barn that had sheltered them from the storm. Every turn of the road felt like a memory reborn. About halfway through the ride, they stopped at a long overlook for a break. Rows of bikes lined the edge of the valley. Bottles of water were passed around, and stories flowed easily. A veteran with gray hair told them about his brother, who never made it home. A young woman shared how Riley's story made her brave enough to ride again after an accident. Cassie listened, tears forming, her heart full. What had started as loss had become a movement of healing. Maya wiped her cheeks and smiled at the group. "Look at this. We didn't just ride for her, we built something she'd be proud of." Tara nodded. "Riley's road just keeps going." Keanu leaned against his bike, arms folded, listening quietly. He never interrupted, never took attention. When a teenager shyly approached and asked, "Mr. Reeves, why do you ride?" he smiled faintly and said, "Because it reminds me that forward is the only direction that makes sense." Cassie caught his words and nodded. That's what she believed too. When the engines roared again, the pack rode on through the narrowing canyon towards Sunset Valley. The air vibrated with sound, every throttle twist sending echoes up the cliffs. Keanu and the women rode together at the center, their ride with heart patches glowing in the light. As they neared the ridge, the sun began to set, casting the same golden hue that had once framed Riley's final farewell. Cassie felt a chill, not from cold, but from the sheer beauty of it, the full circle of their journey. When they stopped again at the valley overlook, hundreds of riders lined up behind them, their engines idling in unison. The view stretched endlessly, painted in the same fiery glow they had seen that day. Cassie removed her helmet, the wind lifting her hair. "This is her road now," she said softly. "All of ours." Keanu nodded, his eyes warm but distant. "Every mile we ride with heart keeps her here." The riders revved their engines in salute, a thunderous, unified sound that rolled through the canyons like applause. The noise faded into a peaceful hum as they began the return journey, headlights flickering like constellations under the falling dusk. Later that night, aerial footage of the event would show a sea of bikes cutting through the desert under a blood-orange sky. The headlines would read, "The Ashes Ride, where loss turned into legacy." But for those who rode that day, it wasn't about fame. It was about motion, memory, and love that refused to die. As the stars began to appear, Cassie glanced at Keanu and smiled. "She's still leading, isn't she?" He looked ahead, his voice calm. She never stopped. A week after the Ashes Ride, the hum of the engines was still in Cassie's ears. The noise had faded, but the feeling hadn't the quiet ache of something sacred completed. She sat alone at her kitchen table, a blank sheet of paper in front of her. The morning light poured through the window, touching the page like an invitation. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock. On the table sat a small, framed photo of Riley, the same one they had placed by the motel window. Riley's grin seemed almost alive, as if she were still teasing her from beyond the edge of time. Cassie picked up a pen and began to write. "Hey, Riles. It's strange writing this, knowing you won't read it, but maybe you will. Maybe the wind that carried you across that valley still finds its way here." She paused, staring at the ink. The words came slowly, carefully. "We did it. We brought you home. The ride was harder than I thought. It would be hotter, colder, scarier. The storm almost broke us, but we made it. And you were there the whole time. I swear I heard you laugh every time we stopped to argue or lost our way. Cassie smiled faintly, her eyes wet. You would have loved the people we met. The world saw the video. You, me, all of us standing there. But what they didn't see was the quiet part. The fear, the forgiveness. The moment when Keanu fixed Maya's bike in the dark and said that storms don't come to break us, they come to wash something clean. You'd have liked him, Riles. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, it feels like the road itself is speaking. She leaned back, exhaling softly. After we said goodbye to you, something changed in all of us. Juno stopped doubting herself. Maya's opening her own repair shop. Tara started mentoring younger riders. And me? I finally forgave myself for not coming to see you that last time. You probably forgave me long before I did. I guess that's what love does. It waits for us to catch up. The pen shook in her hand. She wiped her eyes and continued. I used to think loss was an ending, but it's not, is it? It's just a curve in the road. You turn, you lean, and you trust the wind to hold you up. You taught me that. You always did. Cassie paused again, looking out the window. The street outside was quiet. A bird perched on a telephone wire, wings open against the sunlight. They call it the Ashes Ride now. Hundreds of people came, Riles. They rode for you. For all the ones they lost. You'd have hated the attention, but you would have loved the roar of it. I think you always knew your story wasn't meant to end in silence. She smiled through her tears, gripping the pen tighter. We rode through grief, and we found grace. Cassie set down her pen for a moment, letting the words sink into the page. The air in the room felt different now, lighter, almost peaceful. She glanced once more at Riley's photo and whispered, "That's all I wanted to say." But after a pause, she picked up the pen again. "One more thing," she wrote. "I'm learning to ride differently now. Not faster, not harder, just truer. I stop when the view's good. I talk to strangers. I laugh when the road surprises me. You taught me that joy isn't found in reaching the end, but in keeping the wheels turning." Her handwriting wavered as she reached the bottom of the page. "I promise I'll live the way you did, wide open. No brakes on kindness. If the road really connects us all, then I'll see you again somewhere out there. Maybe in a sunset. Maybe in the sound of an engine. Until then, ride free, my sister. We'll keep the wind warm for you." She signed it simply, Cass. Folding the letter carefully, she slid it into an envelope, sealing it with trembling fingers. Then she grabbed her jacket and helmet, feeling the familiar thrill of motion tugging at her again. The ride to Riley's old bike shop took less than an hour. It stood on the edge of town, its sign faded but still legible. Riley's. Custom garage. Ride with heart. The windows were dusty, the door locked, the building silent, except for the faint creak of wind against the siding. Cassie parked her Harley at the curb, turning off the engine. The silence that followed was deep and full of ghosts. She slipped the letter from her jacket pocket and walked toward the shop door. Peeking through the glass, she saw the same counter where Riley used to stand, teasing customers, covered in grease and laughter. Cassie pressed the envelope flat against the window, her reflection overlapping Riley's memory inside. "You built dreams here," she whispered. "And somehow, they're still running." She slid the letter through the narrow gap under the door, letting it rest inside on the old checkered floor. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she placed a small charm, Riley's old keychain she'd kept on her belt, on the doorstep. It gleamed faintly in the afternoon light. When Cassie turned back toward her bike, the wind caught her hair, brushing against her face like a gentle hand. She smiled, knowing it was enough. Later that week, when Keanu passed through the same town, he stopped at that very shop. He'd heard about Riley's garage from Cassie after the ride and wanted to see it for himself. Parking his Norton outside, he removed his gloves and stepped up to the door. Inside, the dust had settled softly over the tools and benches. Through the glass, he could see the corner of a letter resting on the floor, the sunlight touching its edge. He didn't open the door, just stood there for a long while, reading the faded words on the sign above. Ride with heart. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small patch, freshly embroidered with those same words. Without hesitation, he slipped it through the mail slot in the door and set it gently on the counter inside. No name, no note, just the patch. Before he left, he looked back once more at the building. "Thanks for the road," he said quietly. The wind moved through the street, carrying the faint sound of distant engines. It was as if somewhere beyond the horizon, a familiar laughter echoed back a promise that love, once set in motion, never really stops. Months passed, yet the story refused to fade. It lingered online like a living echo, reshared, revisited, rewritten by people who needed to believe that decency still existed in the world. Every time the clip resurfaced, someone new found comfort in it. The sight of those riders on the ridge, the ashes drifting into the gold of the sky, and Keanu's quiet words kept reminding people of what humanity could be when pride and noise fell away. News outlets turned it into features. Podcasts analyzed it as a modern legend, a moment of truth on the open road. One headline read, "Grief, Grace, and the Man Who Didn't Want Credit." Commentators debated his humility, artists painted it, musicians sampled his line, "No journey is over if you travel with love." It became a kind of mantra for millions trying to find peace in their own struggles. But through all the attention, Keanu stayed silent. No interviews, no talk shows, no red carpets. His team fielded hundreds of requests, each one politely declined. "He's not doing press on that," they said every time. It wasn't a performance. Still, the story found its way back into the public eye. One afternoon, months after the ride, Keanu appeared briefly at a charity event in Los Angeles, an auction raising funds for a children's hospital. Cameras flashed as he entered, dressed simply in jeans and a dark blazer. He smiled, greeted fans, signed a few posters, and quietly moved toward the back of the room. He had almost made it through unnoticed when a journalist approached him. The reporter's tone wasn't harsh, just curious. "Mr. Reeves, everyone's been moved by what you did on that ride. People say it changed them. Why did you ride with those women that day?" Keanu paused, his expression thoughtful. He didn't seem irritated by the question, only deliberate with his silence. The room around them quieted a little, cameras rising again. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but clear. "Because the road belongs to everyone who's ever carried love in silence." The room fell completely still. There was no grand speech, no dramatic tone, just truth. The journalist lowered the mic slowly. "That's beautiful," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "It's real." Then he excused himself, shaking hands with a few attendees before slipping out into the California evening. By morning, the clip had spread worldwide. News anchors replayed the single sentence on loop. The internet called it the road quote. Artists set it against footage of sunsets and winding highways. Bikers printed it on patches and decals. Even schools began quoting it in graduation speeches. What he hadn't said, but what everyone somehow understood, was that the road wasn't just asphalt, it was life itself. The path people took when carrying invisible burdens, the quiet strength of those who kept going, even when no one noticed. The message was simple but powerful. Love, no matter how heavy, was meant to move. As the quote continued to ripple across the world, something remarkable began to happen. Biker clubs in multiple states organized tribute rides under the same banner, "The Road Belongs to Everyone." People who had never met Riley or Cassie joined in, bringing their own stories of loss, recovery, and quiet love. The message had outgrown a single moment. It had become a movement. Cassie and the women received letters from across the country. Some were from riders who had returned to the road after years away. Others came from families who had never owned a motorcycle, but felt the story's heartbeat all the same. One note from a nurse in Ohio read, "I watched your video after losing my husband. I didn't ride, but I walked the park trail, where we have. Used to go and whispered his name into the wind. It felt like motion again. Thank you for showing me it's okay to move forward." Cassie read that letter aloud at their next meeting, her voice trembling. They were gathered in a small diner off Route 66. The same spot where they'd first stopped months ago. Juno, Maya, and Tara sat across from her, all wearing matching Ride with Heart jackets. Tara leaned forward. People need something to hold on to. Maybe it's time we give them more than just a story. That was the moment the Ride with Heart Foundation was born. They worked late into the nights, drafting ideas, reaching out to the biker community, and calling sponsors. Keanu quietly supported them from behind the scenes, funding, printing costs, website design, and safety workshops. He never attached his name, never spoke publicly about it. For him, the road was the message. Within a month, they launched the Riley Brooks Memorial Scholarship, designed to help women who wanted to ride but couldn't afford gear or training. The first recipient was a young woman named Elena Torres, 19 years old, who had lost her brother in a motorcycle accident 2 years prior. When Cassie called to tell her she'd been chosen, Elena could hardly speak. "I stopped riding after he died," she said softly. "But watching your story, I realized maybe I can ride for him now." Cassie smiled. Then that's exactly what Riley would have wanted. The scholarship announcement spread through the biker world like wildfire. Magazines covered it, local radio hosts talked about it. Riders donated from all over the country, many writing simple notes with their contributions. For Riley, for my brother, for everyone who keeps going. One evening, after the foundation's first fundraiser, Cassie stood outside the event hall with Keanu. The night air was cool, the streetlights glowing faintly. "You know," she said, "it's strange. All this started with a broken bike in the middle of nowhere." Keanu looked out at the horizon and smiled. "Sometimes that's where the best roads begin." Cassie nodded, her eyes soft. "Do you think Riley knows what came of all this?" He paused, thoughtful. She knew before any of us did. Somewhere far off, the faint sound of a motorcycle echoed through the night, steady, graceful, alive. And in that moment, Cassie realized the world hadn't just watched their story, it had joined it. The wind over Sunset Valley was gentler this time. The air carried the scent of blooming sage and faint traces of summer rain. Cassie stood at the familiar overlook, her boots crunching lightly against the stone. The valley stretched beneath her, glowing with soft light, the same gold and rose hues that had framed Riley's final farewell 1 year earlier. Behind her, engines rumbled softly, one by one, shutting off until silence filled the air again. Juno, Maya, and Tara stepped forward, each holding something small. Juno carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Maya held a folded bandana covered in signatures. Tara had a small box filled with trinkets from other riders, bracelets, patches, and little tokens that had been mailed to them by strangers from across the country. Cassie smiled as she turned toward them. "We really did come full circle," she said softly. Maya grinned. "You mean we actually made it on time this year?" That earned a round of laughter, light and easy. The heaviness that had once surrounded this place was gone. The grief hadn't disappeared, it had simply settled into something peaceful. The women set their things down at the edge of the ridge, arranging them beside a small plaque that had been placed there months earlier. It read, "In loving memory of Riley Brooks, Ride with Heart." The words gleamed faintly in the sunlight. Around it were tokens left by visitors, small stones, feathers, and bike keys from riders who'd come to pay respect. As the others adjusted the flowers and placed the box beside the plaque, Cassie took a moment to breathe. The air was crisp and warm at once. She could almost feel Riley's laughter in the wind, playful and reassuring. The familiar rumble of an approaching engine drew their attention. Down the dirt road came a single rider, moving slow, the sun reflecting off the chrome of his bike. Cassie recognized the silhouette instantly, the steady posture, the calm rhythm of the ride. Keanu pulled up, shutting off the Norton with a low growl. His jacket was the same worn leather one he'd worn a year ago, its edges frayed, its surface weathered by time and travel. He removed his helmet and gave a quiet smile. "Didn't think you'd start the party without me." Cassie stepped forward, grinning. "You're right on time, as always." He looked out at the valley, his eyes softening. "Still beautiful," he said. "Still her." Juno walked up with her phone in hand. "You know, the foundation's tripled in members since last year," she said proudly. There's a whole new chapter opening in Arizona next month. Keanu nodded, clearly pleased. Riley would have liked that. The road keeps growing. Maya handed him one of the wildflowers from the bouquet. We kept one for you. He took it gently, tucking it into the front pocket of his jacket. Thanks, he said. She'd appreciate the company. The group gathered near the edge of the ridge as the sun began to dip, its light spilling across the valley like liquid gold. Time had softened the ache that once filled this place. What remained now was reverence, a kind of peace that only comes after miles of learning to let go. They laid their flowers around the plaque, arranging the tokens that had been sent from writers around the world. Some were simple, a keychain, a photo, a patch with the words, "Keep the wind warm." Others were deeply personal letters, written to loved ones, lost, folded, and tied with ribbon. The pile of offerings had grown larger than any of them expected. Cassie looked at it all and shook her head with quiet wonder. She'd never believe how far she's gone, she said softly. Maya smiled. She'd pretend she didn't care, but you know she'd love every second of it. Juno laughed, brushing away a tear. Especially if she got her name on a patch. That would have been her dream come true. They all laughed together, the sound rising into the air, like music. Keanu stood a few feet back, his hands in his jacket pockets, watching them with a calm expression. He didn't interrupt, didn't add words where silence said enough. The setting sun caught the side of his face, turning the lines of age and kindness into something timeless. Cassie turned to him, smiling. You came all this way again. You never miss an ending, do you? He shook his head slightly. I don't think this road ever ends. They stood side by side, watching the sun inch lower. The shadows stretched long, touching the canyon walls where the ashes had once scattered. The valley glowed again, softer but no less beautiful than the year before. Cassie exhaled slowly. Thank you, she said quietly, for finishing the road with us. Keanu's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. You finished it yourselves, he said. I just kept you company. The simplicity of his answer made her smile. Still, I don't think we could have done it without you. He looked at her then, his eyes gentle. Sure you could have. You already had everything you needed. You just forgot where to look. The words lingered in the wind. They all sat together as the sky changed colors crimson, then violet, then deep blue. Someone started a small fire from the driftwood they'd brought, and the flames flickered in the cooling air. The sound of it mixed with the hum of faraway engines, echoing faintly through the canyon below. Tara leaned back, staring up at the stars beginning to appear. Do you think she sees this? She asked. Cassie smiled softly. She's the reason we do. Maya poked at the fire. You think she'd approve of us getting this sentimental? Keanu chuckled. She'd probably call you all soft and then cry when no one's looking. That sent them all laughing again, real and full. As the laughter faded, Cassie picked up a handful of sand and let it drift slowly through her fingers. The grains sparkled in the levered firelight before vanishing into the dark. Feels lighter this year, she whispered. It should, Keanu said. That's what love does when it's shared. It travels until it's weightless. The night deepened, the stars stretching brighter above them. The fire burned low, its last sparks rising into the wind and disappearing into the sky, joining the countless others before them. Somewhere in the valley, a coyote howled a lonely, beautiful sound that echoed across the open space. Cassie looked at Keanu, and he nodded once, as if to say the journey was complete. They stayed until the last ember faded, then stood together one final time. The wind moved gently through the canyon, carrying with it their laughter, their silence, and the memory of a woman who had once taught them all to ride with heart. The next morning, the sky over the valley was clear. The storm of memory that had filled their hearts for so long had finally passed. Cassie and the women stood by the ridge, watching as Keanu prepared his Norton for the road again. The sun caught the edges of the chrome, scattering soft light across the sand. Juno handed him a thermos of coffee. You're really heading out already? She asked. He nodded, smiling faintly. I've got a few more miles to go. Always do. Cassie stepped forward and offered him a small patch, the same one Riley had made years ago. It read, Ride, with heart. The stitching was worn, the colors faded, but the message was eternal. "Keep it," she said softly. "You earned it." He looked at it for a long moment, then placed it inside his jacket pocket. "Thanks," he said, "but I think we all did." They exchanged hugs, quiet and meaningful. There were no grand goodbyes, no promises to call or meet again, just the unspoken understanding that their bond would always remain on the road itself. When Keanu mounted his bike, the engine came alive with a deep, steady growl. The sound carried through the valley, merging with the wind that still whispered through the canyon. Cassie raised her hand in a silent wave, and the others followed. The bike rolled forward, slow at first, then gathering speed as it followed the winding road west. Dust rose behind him, catching the morning light like a trail of gold. The women watched until he was only a small figure on the horizon, leather jacket, black helmet, and the glint of sunlight on metal. As the road stretched endlessly ahead, Keanu's voice echoed softly in his thoughts, carried by the rhythm of the wind. Every road we take is a chance to remember the people we've loved. Some we lose, some we find again in the wind, and sometimes the journey itself becomes the goodbye. The line repeated itself in his mind, weaving through the sound of the engine. The road curved gently through the desert, leading toward the distant shimmer of the Pacific. He passed the old diner where he'd first met them, now quiet and nearly empty. A single Harley was parked outside its mirror, reflecting the same sunlight he chased. He smiled to himself. The memory didn't ache anymore. It warmed him instead. Miles rolled beneath his wheels. He didn't need a destination. The motion itself was the meaning. Up ahead, a hawk soared across the open sky, its shadow gliding across the road. Keanu tilted his head slightly, watching it rise higher until it disappeared into the light. "Riley," he murmured under his breath, as if speaking to the wind. "You found your way home." The sun climbed slowly behind him as the miles passed. The desert began to fade into rolling hills, and soon the faint smell of ocean salt drifted through the air. The road narrowed, winding toward the coast, its black ribbon gleaming under the morning light. Keanu slowed his bike and pulled over at a lookout above the Pacific. The sea stretched endlessly, silver and alive. He turned off the engine, letting the silence settle. The wind moved across the cliffs, carrying the faint roar of distant waves. For a long time, he said nothing. He didn't need to. He stood there, the worn jacket pressed against him, the patch Cassie had given him resting over his heart, the same heart that had carried the echoes of so many rides, so many faces. He thought of Riley, the woman he'd never met but somehow knew. He thought of Cassie and her strength, of Maya's laughter, of Juno's restless hope, and Tara's quiet wisdom. Each of them had taught him something the road never could, that love wasn't a place you arrived at. It was the road itself. He sat down on a nearby rock, his eyes following the horizon where the sky met the sea. His reflection, soft and steady, filled his thoughts again. Every road we take is a chance to remember the people we've loved. Some we lose, some we find again in the wind, and sometimes the journey itself becomes the goodbye. The words felt final, yet freeing. They weren't an ending, they were a truth. Keanu put his helmet back on and started the Norton again. The engine's rumble blended with the crashing waves below. He turned west, following the narrow road that hugged the coastline. The light ahead grew warmer, brighter, until the world around him was painted in gold. The camera of life pulled wider, showing the man and the machine, one silhouette moving through an endless horizon. Dust trailed behind him, catching the light like tiny stars. The road curved ahead, vanishing into the sunset. His voice returned once more, soft and contemplative. Every one of us carries a story. Some are written in laughter, some in loss. But the only way to keep them alive is to keep moving forward, because love doesn't stay still. It travels farther than distance, farther than time. The wind picked up, carrying the words into the vast expanse of orange and blue. Maybe this is the kind of story we all ride in one heart at a time. The screen faded to the golden glow of the horizon, the sound of the engine echoing like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Then came the final message for the viewers, soft but clear. If you believe love travels farther than distance, leave a comment below. Have you ever taken a journey to honor someone you loved? A pause followed, giving the question room to breathe. Tell their story. Let it ride a little farther. The sound of waves faded in. The last frame showed the open road disappearing into sunlight, the words, "Ride with Heart," appearing in quiet white text before dissolving into the glow. Somewhere beyond that road, the wind carried the laughter of a woman who once believed that freedom wasn't the absence of loss, but the courage to keep going anyway. The road continued, the story too.